Where are we all to die in a second wave of changes? We will seek to search for
Hello,
new
everyone.
ways to secure them.
First of all, it was a pleasure to listen to Sergei because 20 years ago I was dealing with a similar field, accessibility of elections. So this is something of interest for me. And now I would like to tell a bit about the influence of the pandemic or uh, maybe pandemic and the field of education are showing us the importance of digital inclusion and where exactly we have problems there and how they are interconnected with other forms of exclusion. And there are such interconnections, although we are not always noticing them. In the middle of March, we suddenly noticed that children had to switch to those distance learning tools, and the scale of that change can be shown in numbers. We have about 700,000 teachers and about 5 million school students. So instead of using the blackboards and multimedia boards in the traditional schools, suddenly they had to teach in an entirely different way. And suddenly the problems started to emerge. First of all, digital problems. It's not that we are lacking computers in Poland. We have quite a good saturation in this regard, but there is quite a big group of people who still do not see the need to use computers. And especially in the families with children, um, the number of families with computers is quite high, but also there are 50,000 of such people. So somehow they had to get an equipment, a piece of equipment, a computer or a tablet. And that's especially a big problem for families with many children, like 5 or 4 children who are school students. And in this case, even for a family with middle income, that would be a challenge financially. So that's the first challenge, the challenge with equipment. So what has been done? Quite big amounts of money were sent to local governments so that those local governments could equip the students with computer equipment. Of course, this was not enough to meet the need because the need was humongous, but in the majority of cases, this gap was filled. So, for instance, I have right now 2 children at school. The first is attending the first grade, and another child is attending the last grade of primary school. And in their case, everyone was able to get access, but still, poverty is a huge limit on the road to accessibility of education. Another problem that was quite easy to notice, especially in the beginning, was the lack of digital competences. Poland still has quite limited skills, as we know from different researchers, and suddenly millions of people had to be forced to improve their competences. And it's not something as simple as just using the Facebook, but also the use of some educational tools, using some digital platforms that were not using before, and they had to suddenly learn all that. So for a person who is at least at the medium level of digital skills, that was still doable. But for people with low level of skills, that was quite a huge barrier. And this was true both for the children who were still using very simple equipment, but also their parents, and also, quite surprisingly, teachers, because the teachers in Poland got used to the traditional ways of using textbooks, copybooks, blackboard, etc., and suddenly they had to make this a tradition, and uh, they didn't have sufficient support. Um, my daughter had only one lesson in the first weeks, but there was some chaos, even though it was improving, and people were trying uh, some tools such as Facebook, Google Class, Microsoft Teams, Jitsi, etc. And some groups of mutual support for teachers started to emerge. And here, thanks to the platform that was created by the Ministry of Digital Transformation, some data started to be disseminated. This was a knowledge center for teachers, and it was used quite frequently, especially in the beginning of the pandemic. Later, of course, this interest subsided a bit because people learned many of the things they needed to have, so this was not as necessary as before. Now, uh, the third kind of problem is the internet connection. And again, for those who live in big cities with good connection, uh, they don't have to worry because here at home, uh, I work from home, to my children study from home, and for some time my wife was doing the same, and we had quite enough of the broadband to do that. But there are many spots in Poland where people have troubles with broadband internet. They are quite often relying on the old telephone system, and something that was sufficient to use Facebook suddenly turned out to be not sufficient for education, because here we have to transmit the voice and the video, and that, of course, creates challenges in terms of broadband. In the cities and bigger towns, this problem has been solved, but in villages and small towns, that's still a problem, and the quality was quite low. So here, not much could be done fast. Mm, Fortunately, for several years already, there was this uh, project of enabling broadband for schools, but in the current times, broadband at schools was not as necessary as broadband at home. But even today, I saw an offer from a telecommunication company uh, in their service package. They are not charging money for educational platforms, which means they enable using these e-learning platforms and communication platforms free of charge. And I see this as a very good solution. And one more area, the fourth area of problems. Please stop me if we are out of time, because I can continue forever. But the fourth area is the field of software. Sometimes we have lack of it, sometimes we have too much of it. So this problem emerged from the very beginning, from the very beginning of the pandemic, because the teachers having limited knowledge were using the tool they knew how to use, and they were encouraging the students to use the same. So they could have one lesson on Zoom, another on Skype, another on Google Class, etc. So the problem here is that the majority of those solutions are not free or are free to some limited extent. And here the big corporations made a good thing because Google and Microsoft enabled their solutions quite cheaply or free of charge for educational purposes. And I'm noticing that Microsoft Teams has become probably the main tool for such distant education, which of course is a bit of a drawback because this creates a monopoly and it becomes difficult for other companies to join the market if someone offers a good service of such quality. One more interesting problem in Poland is that we have those so-called e-journals for educational purposes, and uh, they are provided by private companies, the tools for communication with students and parents. And those e-journals also required some competences from the users. They are quite complicated as systems, but also they did not manage the scope of the use. So uh, those journals since the beginning of pandemic were used for exchanging huge amount of information with parents and children, and the system crashed quite often. So I was thinking to tell about the things we failed at, and that would be probably a warning for others because I believe that that's a problem similar for everyone. We still do not know how to get to the students which got out of the system. That's a huge problem. And some solutions which are currently emerging are the solutions of the so-called hybrid education, which means that the teacher is at school in class, and in the same class there are some students who do not have access to internet, and also some students with disabilities, so the lesson is happening offline for those few students and online for all the rest. So that's a solution which is being used only in places where we able to reach out to those kids. But we know that there are many others which are not in this system yet, and they have lost more than half a year already, and they will be losing even more. So we are noticing both in the students and in the teachers that they are learning quite fast. They needed to learn, and of course they did learn. Some of them don't want to learn. So in this case, yeah, there is a problem. But most of the teachers learned
Mr.
and
Jacek,
actually started to use those tools. So I'm finishing.
please continue. Thank you.